All right, we're coming back after a weekend, and we're continuing to work on assignment 5. This is how far we got last class. And we were cleaning up our line art in digital inking. So if we look in our assignment 5 folder, we will see an AI file that we were working on. I want to check which one is the latest. It's this one. So I marked that as green. That's my working format. And all I have to do is double click it and it will open up in Adobe Illustrator on our lab computers. Unfortunately, there is no freeware, truly free software, browser-based or otherwise, that allows you to save as a vector format, right? But we could bring things into Illustrator and then image trace them into a vector if we created them in Photopea or in Clip Studio or in GIMP or another freeware. But remember, the goal is that we can scan into this line art and it's perfectly clean no matter how we scale it. So that's a vector, not pixel-based. And once we're happy with it in Illustrator, bless you, and I can help you check this, and we have Kleenex up here for anyone who needs it. It's good to move it off of the artboard to make sure there's no white or no strokes in the design, just like we did with our logos. You see there's no strokes anywhere. And once it's like that, then we can save it as one of our vector formats that we can make use of in other programs. So the first thing we save it, always to our computer, is as an AI file. That's our working format, but that only opens in Illustrator. That allows us to keep working on it. So I'm just updating the one I saved. Keep all the defaults. The next is to save as to your computer, same name but different format, an EPS file. And you'll see it's not just EPS, it's Illustrator EPS. That's because this is Adobe's transferable vector format. This is the one that works best with Photoshop. It's the one we're going to use. It's the one we used for our logo. And it's the one that on newer computers like ours does not show up as a viewable icon in its preview. So it has an empty preview icon. And that's kind of as a warning to help people understand. And this is what's called a transferable format, right? It's made to go between programs, but it's not very useful on its own. I send those to clients, but then that's because they lay it out in their vendor, like printing programs. So EPSs are kind of odd ducks. And then you want to file, save as, and then the last format to your computer is as an SVG, which is down at the bottom. That stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. That's just the general transferable format. And that will work with programs like Vector.com, programs like Photopea, and just keep all the defaults. Now, the reason we need to make sure it fits on the artboard in Illustrator, even though we're not printing out of Illustrator, is so it works for the SVG. And then once we've done all those, we can close Illustrator. And you want to note these different formats. And I had saved it previously, but I'll take the one I just saved. And we still cannot post it to Canvas, right? Because it's a vector. And we need a raster format to go as an online format. But if we go to Unit 11, Spot Illustration, this gives us all our background, and we skip to the end where we post it. We can also find this under Assignments. The first thing I posted was my first requirement, my sketch. The next thing I'm going to post is my clean black line art. And it should be a vector. But you can't post a vector. So what do? Just like we did with our logo, we have to open up a new Photoshop file. So I open up Photoshop. This is once you have your EPS saved. And we're getting it ready to make it print ready already. So just like we did for our logo, we're going to make a new file and we're going to make it print resolution. So we're going to set it in inches. If your illustration is taller than it is wide, you are going to do 8 by 10. If it's wider than it is tall, you're going to do 10 by 8. And the resolution we want is our studio resolution, 350 pixels per inch. And we're going to call it our name, Assignment 5, Spot Illustration. Right, and then create. So what we have is a blank pixel grid of white pixels, and it is exactly 8 inches by 10 inches by 350 pixels per inch, which is optimum printing if we were going to print to an 8 by 10 like we did for the midterm critique. And now what do we do with that EPS file we just saved? Because we're going from Adobe program to Adobe program, from Illustrator to Photoshop. We drag and drop it in, and it will come in as a smart object, as a vector. And then I pretend this is the mat around it. I don't want it touching at the edges. So I'm going to hold down Option, and that will scale it on all sides equally until I think it looks good. And then I hit Return. And now we have the vector. And now the vector is rasterized, but it's rasterized at the resolution I chose. And if I chose another resolution, if I decide to make this 30 by 40 inches by 350 pixels per inch, it would be perfectly clean at that resolution because it is a smart object. It's going to stay a smart object. So now how do we post this to Canvas? We simply save it as an online format. So we save a copy with the background turned on. We don't save it as a PNG. We save it as a JPEG because we want that white background for this step. JPEG. I want to save it to, I guess, to the desktop for now. And I want to rename it, even though JPEG will be different. So I'll just call this the line art. And then because it's only black and white pixels, it's anti-aliased a little bit, but it's only 1.4 megabytes, even though it's full resolution. That's why coloring books are a whole lot cheaper to make than full colored books, illustrated books. Okay, I can find it on my desktop. Remember, function F11 gets you back to your desktop. Here it is. I mark it orange because it's an online format, and I put it to my Assignment 5 folder. There we go. And now I can post that as well as my second requirement. So some of you might be finishing up your vector line art, but once you're finished, that is how you get it submitted. And you can see the differences now between my sketch and my clean vector. The clean vector line art requires you to make decisions. Very clear decisions about where edges are. And my vector line art is very much intentionally like a coloring book, where everything is a contained shape, which will make it easier for digital coloring, which comes next. All right, now, in order to understand digital coloring, if you look back up in the directions, I have this nice handout here. It's also under links if you want it just as a PDF for yourself. So far, we've sketched it. We've made the vector line art. The next step is what's called flat local color. Now, a lemon is pretty easy to color because a lemon has an agreed upon local color, just like a banana does. What is that color? Yellow. So no matter the light condition, there's yellow in a lemon. There's yellow in a banana. Just like there's yellow in Charlie Brown's t-shirt. Right? So I look up Charlie Brown by Charles Schulz. This is an example of flat coloring. He has one skin tone. So everywhere his skin is showing, his arms, his knees, his neck, his head, his ears, all of that's the exact same pixel, right? His shirt is the exact same yellow pixel, and his shoes are the exact same brown pixel. So how many colors does Charlie Brown have? 3 colors. Black and white are not colors, right? But they are fills. So he has a black fill on his shorts. He has some white in there as well. It's just from the sketch marks. But that's about it. That is flat color. When you get this kind of version of Charlie Brown, it is no longer flat color. But you have to start coloring with flat color. So that is always what we start with. To understand this a little bit better, beyond just my little handout, is this link to slides. And it is exhaustive. So this kind of stuff just fascinates me. And as a working illustrator, this is vital knowledge. But this will give you kind of all kinds of examples of all the ways you can push your digital coloring. So I'm going to go through it really quickly. So digital coloring is different than digital painting, though it is a subset of it because it's control of mostly pixels at the end of the day. But the reason it's different is because digital coloring happens behind real or implied line art. And why do I say implied? That's because in some digital coloring techniques, you make the line art, you color it, and then you remove the line art. But it's still necessary. So here we have just like a little sketch version done by a past student of Stitch. And you can see the lines, and you can see how the coloring goes behind the lines as this is built, right? Here we have some animation by Miyazaki. And you can see the lines kind of contain everything, especially in character work and prop work, the things that are going to move and on the boat. But then within those lines, the colors are filled in behind, which means the lines always give us our edges, which means if the lines are vectors, our edges will always be clean, even if our coloring is completely pixel-based. So this is what I want all of you, the step I want all of you to get to. This is kind of the minimum you need to learn about digital coloring. And that is to sketch, to do clean line art, and then flat color, and then duotone color, right? And this is a type of duotone color called hard edge, where you see these crisp delineations between the shadows and the highlights. So right there. This is another handout. And it shows kind of a version of Nico, our campus mascot. Right now we're at this step. We have the clean vector line art, right? You can think of it as an outline, but it's actually just full line art. The next step is going to be flat local color, just like Charlie Brown. But unlike Charlie Brown, I don't need to use the same green everywhere. As long as each shape gets filled in with just one pixel color, that's flat color. I get to determine what that local color is. So Nico has kind of a green tuft on his helmet. He can have different grays as long as they're each contained, different blues, and even the eyes, the claws, all of those need to be filled with something. From there, we can add highlights. Now, highlights would be pure whites. White is not a color, so this is still flat local color. It's just flat local color with white highlights. Because you see, that white is not a version of the gray. That white is not a version of the green. That white is just white, and white doesn't have a color frequency. But from there, you can soften your edges. So everyone needs to get up to this step, right? But then these are all the ones that you can push it further if you want. So this is softening the duotone edges into soft edge, which is very easy to do once you've already picked your hard edges. And then this is starting to do what's called full spectrum color, where you have the highlights of the yellow interfering with the blues and the greens. So now the colors start to be mixing. And you're like, play with highlights, play with shadows. And then this is what's called color holds. So what's the difference between this one and this one? Well, you'll notice now there's little sparkles above the line art, to make the helmet look shiny, to make the beak look shiny, to make the claws look sharp, right? Anything that's put above the line art is a special